Good morning, everyone. This is Sultan Hatoum from Abu Dhabi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I would like to thank you for joining us in our 10th session of the program. This is our 5th week together, and I hope you are getting all the benefits from webinars and leveraging the knowledge, expertise, and advice provided by our esteemed speakers. Today, we host experts from Deloitte who will discuss liquidity solutions and how optimal cash and working capital management can improve liquidity. We discussed on Sunday with PwC managing fraud risk and how to prevent the global pandemic from becoming a fraud pandemic. A very interesting topic that I would recommend you all to watch if you missed it, as all the program sessions are recorded and can be viewed on our Facebook page. Please do visit the link shared in the chat box. We just shared it now. If you wish to attend this session in Arabic, and please make sure as well to share with us your questions so our speakers can address them in the last 15 minutes of the session. Unprecedented pressures have come to light as a result of the pandemic. This was an addition to the traditional pressures caused by the normal course of doing business. And among these is the liquidity pressures, which has always been and will remain a main concern of businesses seeking success and flexibility in business decisions. The recent disruptions represented by staff being quarantined, failing supply chains, unavailability of inventories, and sharp and sudden reductions in demand from customers are creating serious issues for companies of all sizes and types across a wide range of sectors, and is putting sudden, unanticipated pressure on working capital lines and liquidity. Even for companies who have not yet been affected, management teams are exploring fallback plans in case the period of disruption becomes prolonged. They say cash is king. This has proved to be right for Amazon upon acquiring Whole Foods in 2017, sending panic through the grocery industry and disrupting the markets. However, cash can also lose spending power over time if it do not offer a return that keeps up with the rate of inflation, and can cause holders of cash as a long-term investment to experience a negative return over time, which confirms the need for a balanced approach towards cash management. With the current market conditions, you should ask yourselves, how much money do you need and for how long? How do you slot this money into your existing capital structure? And who could you borrow from and at what terms? To be able to answer these questions, you need to forecast trading and cash flows, reforecast actually, because I would assume that you already have a proper forecast in place at the beginning of the year. Take rapid actions around working capital to preserve cash and identify quick wins to deliver rapid and tangible cash flows benefits, and review existing facilities and analyze borrowing capacity. I hope this sets out the stage for today's session with Waqas Ahmed and Tom Howitt, who will discuss short-term cash flow forecasting, methods to release cash from working capital, and potential external liquidity solutions. As an outcome of this session, we expect you to leverage best practices to be shared by our guests in order to improve your working capital management and processes, have better planning and controls in place, get more visibility on your cash on the short, medium, and long term, and ultimately be ready for the recovery stage. A brief introduction about our speakers before we start. Waqas Ahmed is a Principal Director in Financial Advisory in Deloitte, based in Abu Dhabi, with over 17 years of financial advisory experience in the UK, Australia, and the Middle East. Waqas has a broad range of financial advisory, specifically acquisition due diligence experience, including sale and purchase agreement reviews of business plans, and financial feasibilities. Tom Howitt is a director in the Deloitte Financial Advisory Services team as well, with over 12 years of professional experience. Tom relocated to the Middle East following 6 years with Deloitte UK restructuring team, and he has extensive experience of performing IBRs and other advisory reviews, including performance improvement engagements on behalf of large lenders, corporates, and family offices. Waqas, I will pass it to you by a quick question. Is cash is king proved to be accurate?
Thank you, Sultan. A very apt question. Let me start off by just thanking both you and the Chamber for arranging this event. We're certainly very humbled at the opportunity to present to you and the audience. And absolutely, cash is king is the question that is on everybody's mind right now. Let me just take a step back before I of course, answer the question. And it's really, really obvious that people are extremely concerned with cash flow and the cash position right now. But let me take a step back and just give everybody a brief overview of where we are from a pandemic perspective. Both myself and Tom have been working in the region for the last several years. A couple of areas that we're very passionate about are, of course, performance improvement, corporate turnaround, and we've advised a number of businesses over the last few years in various sectors around how to improve their performance, how to improve cash flow, planning, monitoring, budgeting, and indeed run businesses more efficiently. So we really hope to bring some of that insight to the table and share it with the audience today. And of course, we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So very much looking forward to some questions at the end as well. So if I start off with what the COVID-19 pandemic has meant for us all, I think we are all acutely aware of where we are in the position. A few months ago, nobody expected that we would be here at this time in the year. I thought maybe I would be planning a nice summer vacation right now, but that's not what's on the front of my mind right now. So certainly, we've had a scenario where businesses, the economy, and the social community, of course, has been impacted. There have been some restrictions in place, as everybody's aware, on social mobility, on movement, on the ability to conduct business. I've been working from home for the last several months, which of course has its ups and downs, as I'm sure everybody can imagine. I've had to tell my children to be very quiet while daddy's presenting. But if you look at our view around what's happening in the COVID-19 environment is a three-phased impact on the economy. The first is respond, which I think a lot of us have now been through, which is just the immediate response on how do we deal with this pandemic and the risks that it causes. And for our business at Deloitte, for example, we've put the safety of our staff and personnel and indeed our clients first, and we've implemented very robust work from home policy and so on, and really made sure that we look after our people. That's largely been the respond phase. And what that's required is us, although we as a business we're quite advanced in that already, but us investing and enabling in remote working tools and so on to enable that to happen, such as this platform that we're currently using. At the same time, now we are moving more towards the recover phase. And recover means businesses being allowed to operate more freely. As you're all aware, even within the community, we now see malls open, restaurants open, a lot more activity, cars on the road. There are no movement restrictions, 24 hours, and some of the national sterilization program related restrictions have been eased as well. So we see now the economy recovering. And the next phase that we see will be hopefully a thrive phase where the economy picks up again and really we thrive coming out of this crisis. However, having said all of that, I think that the recover phase will continue for some time. We are not yet back to a world which was pre-COVID. We don't expect to get to that world in the very near term. We expect that movement restrictions will continue. Some of the trends that we're seeing in other countries, I think we're fortunate here in the UAE and particularly in Abu Dhabi, but some of the other countries are still grappling with COVID, and we keep reading the media reports. So we feel that businesses need to plan and prepare themselves for the recover phase, and very importantly, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is position themselves for the thrive phase. You need to prepare and enable your business and your liquidity cash flow position to take advantage of the thrive phase. So with that, I'll hand over to Tom, who's going to talk us through some of the tactical opportunities that are available to businesses to position themselves for the thrive phase. Tom, I think
Tom,
you
you're
have the
on
mute
mute.
on.
Yeah.
Apologies. So I think what we're seeing here is, today's session is very much around liquidity and cash management, and what you can very quickly see. This is a very summarized view of all the different challenges that businesses have right now. And I think, come back to your point, Sultan. Cash is king. How do you fit that into the overall structure? How do you fit that into all the different things that is a priority for business right now? Not least the fact the disruption that we're all having on our own personal lives. And just doing a bit of research for this session, it was quite interesting that one of the main business groups in the UAE had highlighted that over 60% of its members had highlighted liquidity and cash flow as their number one concern right now, which does really say a lot considering all the other challenges that we've had to deal with. And so really what we want to talk a little bit around today was some of the enhancements that we've seen businesses implementing over the past few months, and really some of that best learning and insight that we can bring to this group. And I think as an overarching statement, it's very obvious, but just simply preparing a cash flow forecast is no longer enough, right? Because I think in business as usual, a robust cash flow forecast that could be sent from wider stakeholders was the baseline on which to build strategic decisions. And I think that hasn't changed, but the level of headroom, the pressures that are coming on cash have increased significantly. And therefore, as part of that cash flow forecasting process, the way we've kind of set it out here is businesses need to look at what are the tactical enhancements that can happen more day to day. And this needs to be embedded throughout the organization. This isn't just a top management. This isn't just a shareholder driven set of enhancements. These are enhancements that need to be implemented throughout the entire organization, and that culture really needs to be embedded within the organization. And then, from a process perspective, what needs to be changed? What needs to be changed to reflect that we are not in business as usual today? And coming back to Wakas's point, probably won't be for some time. So I just wanted to talk through some of these enhancements in a little bit more detail. So I think one thing that's been clear, and I think all businesses probably throughout the region, throughout the world, have looked at what is of its cost base and of its natural outflow spend, what is discretionary, what has an element of discretionary nature to it. And that could be the easy ones, probably around travel and entertainment, are probably disappeared naturally. If you look at kind of more business development, I think businesses are looking at that a lot more strictly and robustly around what is the kind of return on investment of that spend, where there are certain projects and capex projects that have been planned maybe for some time. Which of these projects are critical and non-critical? What can be deferred? What can be potentially mothballed to react to the current environment? So I think that's something that's probably naturally happened throughout most organizations. Suppliers, you mentioned the disruption that's happened to the supply chain for many businesses in many sectors, and I think that is, probably in the early stages of COVID was one of the key disruptors to business as usual. Having that guarantee of supply on time, of the right quality, etc. And I think what we're seeing now as we move out of that respond and into recover is, many businesses are experiencing cash flow pressure, and our suppliers are no different. So really having a view on which of our suppliers are potentially on the brink of failure. Maybe there's some support that we need to give to our suppliers to be able to continue that supply. Where we have sole suppliers, that's certainly the case. Where there is a choice of suppliers, previously price and delivery time and service quality may have been a differentiator. Now it may be payment terms, and you may be willing to sacrifice certain elements of your supply to get better payment terms, and that's something that you maybe wouldn't naturally do in business as usual, but it's something that needs to be done now. And similarly with customers, we're seeing we're doing it in our own business. We're encouraging all businesses to do this, throughout the region, is really look at all of your customers in a lot of detail to understand who are your good payers and bad payers, if you like. How can you reward the good payers? How can you how can you offer some discounts? We're seeing in education a lot of early payment discounts, for example. This is a working capital optimization tool, more than anything else, but it's also, is there as an incentive to get cash in through the door earlier and also reward those customers. And similarly, where we've seen perhaps sales teams incentivized on volumes or particular price, now we're seeing that incentive flip more towards the payment terms that you can negotiate. So you may have to give away a bit of price, but to get those better payment terms. And I think that's something that's going to improve liquidity in the short term. Working capital finance, this is something that we're seeing as absolutely key. We're seeing, I think this is going to be more important as we move further into the respond phase and into the thrive phase. Around what we're seeing at the moment is businesses that are maintaining a cash position, because obviously there is a natural unwind of a current balance sheet position, right? You have a set of receivables which are unwinding over time, even if activity levels are somewhat depressed. I think where businesses, and from the business planning exercises that we've done with companies, what's really interesting is when you look perhaps a few months into the future and you see that ramp up start to happen again from activity perspective, that also comes with a working capital requirement. And actually, the interesting part of all this is actually when we start to return to normal, in inverted commas, what we foresee is a tightening on working capital and liquidity as businesses come out of that. So where previously, a certain project maybe have entered into, and then we'll work out how we finance it in parallel. I guess what we're kind of saying at the moment is, get your finance in place first before committing to a new project or specific increase in activity. And that's something that really needs to be planned very carefully. We talked about costs. We've seen how can companies convert fixed cost to variable. A sale and lease back of a factory or a certain operating center can be an obvious answer to that. We've also seen businesses move some employees away from a pure fixed remuneration structure to a more incentive based variable remuneration. I think that can work for both parties if the overall remuneration potential package is better than what you were on before. So that is something that can work for both parties and gives the business more of a variable cost structure. And I guess the other thing we'll probably add is around inventory. Certainly within the retail sector or within the construction building materials sector, there was an incentive, I guess, in BAU world to buy in bulk to lower that unit cost as much as possible. But obviously that eats into your working capital. And I guess what we're seeing more and more now is businesses reduce that storefront of inventory. Again, it impacts the choice and range that you can offer your customers. It may impact your margins, but it's a tool to improve working capital and liquidity in the short term. And I guess what we're kind of, there's an overarching theme here that within this recover phase, the reality is the businesses are being forced to prioritize cash over profits, over margins, over bottom line, which is something that kind of goes against our kind of natural and foundation way of thinking about business, which is a challenge. But if it gives the business that chance to build that foundation to thrive coming out of this situation, then it's clear how important that is. And just before I hand back to Waqas to walk us through the process piece, stakeholder communication, it goes without saying, is absolutely essential. If we are making these tough decisions around margin versus cash, we need all stakeholders briefed and inputting and approving those decisions, because they are important decisions and they can set the tone. If you reduce your price today to get better terms, what's to say that in 1-2 years time it's going to be difficult to kind of move back to your old pricing structure, because people get used to new norms. So wider stakeholder communication is absolutely key when making these decisions. Waqas.
Thank you, Tom. I just very much agree with everything that you've just said, and I'd like to share some examples that hopefully our audience and community will follow. These are everyday examples that we see. So I think it's going back to Sultan's King is really at the forefront of businesses' mind. And we see examples of businesses in the marketplace sacrificing profitability for cash. So some examples I'll share with you are, we know that educational institutions like schools are offering discounts for early payment of fees for next year. That clearly impacts their profitability, but gets cash in the door. We see a number of sales at retail outlets and indeed e-commerce platforms where we see businesses reducing the inventory that they're holding and essentially get cash in the door. So that's happening, and I'm sure a number of us are taking advantage of some good offers that are available out there. I recently saw some advertisement campaign from a mall which is basically saying that children eat for free, and I think those kind of incentives are there where businesses are encouraging the community members to start using restaurants again, and encouraging people to come out and start essentially life as normal. But I think what is really, really important is also from a tactical point of view that businesses need to prepare for the new normal that's coming up ahead. So if you're a business that's not investing in the technology or in the strategic initiatives that are going to be part of your business going forward, then I would very much recommend that you think again. We do need to conserve cash in some scenarios, but at the same time, we need to be mindful of where different sectors and different businesses are headed in the future, and we need to plan for that. And a lot of that technology is going to be around a lot of that investment is going to be around technology, around digital play, e-commerce, working remotely, and those sort of things, and enabling our workforces and customers to interact seamlessly using technology as a platform. So I think that's important. It comes with all its challenges around governance, control, quality, indeed prevention, data security, and all those sort of things, which I know, Sultan, you're working on various separate webinars around those topics, but I think those are things that people need to think about. I'd like to move on quickly now to talk about the process enhancements that we see businesses need to implement to manage cash flow and working capital. So really the first one we have is, of course, governance, and it's very important to have governance and control around use of cash. We use this term having a cash czar, like a CFO type person, a senior competent person in an organization that's single-handedly controlling cash and discretionary spend flows for a business. Last thing you want is particularly for large or diverse organizations to have different parts of the organization receiving and spending cash without proper synchronization and planning, and that can lead to some bottlenecks. So I think it's very important to have a singular point of control. The other key element that we recommend in such scenarios, of course, is to have a very relentless matching of inflows and outflows. So a promise to pay from a customer today is less reliable than it was a few months ago, just because the world is a very, very different place. So we recommend that any payments, any commitments to make payments are actually matched with cash inflows. Let's get the cash in first, and then make the outflow plans and commitments. I'm going to skip the scenario planning because I think that's very, very important. So we'll come back to that. The constant dialogue is, of course, extremely important. I think it's very, very important in any crisis situation that key stakeholders are brought on the journey and people are sharing real-time info. The last thing that boards and executive management, shareholders, owners, proprietors want are surprises. So wherever we see a bottleneck coming or some kind of distress situation coming up ahead, we need to be absolutely sharing that with the stakeholders. And part of that is, of course, leveraging the sources of finance that businesses have available, whether that is talking to your banks, your relationship managers, deferring interest payments, deferring capital payments, drawing down on existing facilities which might have headroom available, coming up with new facilities, talking to shareholders for injection of new equity. All those things need to be explored. Different businesses will be in different stages of their journey. Some businesses may have a lot of headroom available, so relatively easy, we can draw down on that. Other businesses are quite stretched and may look to equity. There may be some businesses that are extremely stretched and have exhausted all opportunities, and they might look at strategic partners, or indeed we're now looking at some kind of distressed M&A in the market as well, where businesses are bringing in new equity investors to help out. So I'll go back to the scenario planning point now. This, from both Tom and my experience, is one of the most important points that we would like businesses to consider. In any distress situation where there is a shock event, and with certainly the current level of uncertainty in the marketplace around how COVID-19 will play out, indeed, if there are second waves or not, and what will be the severity of them, what will be public policy, when will borders open, when will travel and life return to normal, what does this mean for the global economy, for our business partners in other countries and suppliers and so on. There is a lot of uncertainty. So what do we recommend in those scenarios? Of course, a lot of planning. We would look at different planning scenarios. We would recommend businesses look at high, medium, low cases, scenario A, B, C, essentially come up with various plans that can help them foresee what kind of disruptions might be there. So businesses can consider either a very sharp recovery, which we all hope is the case, a slightly slower recovery, a phased recovery where we have a sharp recovery, then a slight slowdown, then maybe pick it up again. These are all possible scenarios out there. So businesses should look and plan for that. And one key element that sits behind all of this is, of course, having a robust business plan. Any business can seek additional finance, both from existing lenders, banks, shareholders, equity providers, provided it has a robust business plan that sits behind it. What is really very important right now is for businesses to have a view as to how we are going to manage this crisis. What does this look like in a few months? And where do we see ourselves in the coming months and years? How will we capitalize on the opportunities that will come out of this pandemic? How will we survive it? And how we may return and provide a return on new capital that might be injected right now. If there is a business that has a clear and robust business plan that leads to profitability, that leads to growth, that leads to sustainability, I think that business will find support in funding. What will be challenging is businesses that haven't done that thinking, that are essentially putting money in now in the hope that things turn better, but essentially a slightly blind, head in the sand type approach. That will be very, very challenging. I think investors, bankers, lenders, equity holders, all stakeholders will be interested in businesses that have a plan, that have a recovery plan, a platform for the new normal. How are our operating models going to change in the new world? Are we moving more towards an e-commerce platform? How do we do business in a social distancing environment? How do we minimize risk to our employees and indeed to our customers? That is very, very important. And once you've got that, I think you've got a real platform to obtain the necessary funding to see through the storm and come out of it on the other side, and hopefully take advantage of the thrive and growth phase that we all expect is around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to build on that, few additional points from my side, I guess.
Tom, I'll hand over to you to go through the credit solutions.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, look, the reality is that the revenue, in many sectors, the revenue that has been, not achieved over the past few months, in many cases is gone. In some sectors we talk about pent-up demand and that the opportunity for that to kind of be released over the next few months, but in many sectors that's not the case. And coming back to what I was kind of talking about earlier, is that is going to create a working capital requirement and liquidity pressure in some way, shape, or form. And we live in a market in the UAE that is so it's a very active banking market, and therefore a natural kind of first step for many businesses will be speaking to your relationship manager, speaking to your lender to try and find some form of relief. And generally, from our experience and what we've seen, is that lenders, and shareholders as well, are generally supportive if they can see, a well-run business that that can demonstrate and articulate and quantify the impact that COVID has had to the best of their ability, and show that adequate measures are in place to respond. Coming back to what we were talking about before, that there are tactical and process enhancements in place driving the best possible solution for the business, because the last thing that lenders or shareholders want to do is throw money into a black hole, and therefore coming back to Wakas's point around having a business plan showing how the business can get through this under a range of different scenarios, because no one has a crystal ball, and knows what the next kind of 2 years, 3 years what that future looks like. So going with a business plan that shows a range of sensible scenarios, that shows that enhancements are in place, that shows that this can be bridged with certain funding, and there's a return on that, and a return of that money to whoever has provided it. So I think that's something that is absolutely key. And just to kind of some of the things that we've kind of seen, and what we'd ask probably people to consider as they go through this process is, be very clear about how much money do you want and how long for. That seems like a very sensible and simple observation, but sometimes it's quite difficult to articulate and go with this is how much we need, and we need it until this period, and then we can start paying you back. That's quite a difficult question to answer sometimes. And that's where you do need that scenario planning. You need measures in place to show that you've optimized that number as much as you can. And then we need to think about how does any new money coming in affect the existing capital structure, because if you're going to an existing lender to add more debt, what does that do to your leverage position? What does that do to your covenants? But also, if you're going to alternative lenders, new lenders, you need to think about how does that inter-creditor position work, and that's a kind of legal question as well as a financial question. And you also need to think about what are the other sources of collateral that the business may have. Are there assets that are unencumbered that can be offered to new investors? Because as we see in this market, time and time again, lenders do need, in the majority of cases, physical collateral to offer attractive terms. And from what we've seen is that when you have this multiple creditor situation, they're very common is kind of clauses and consents that are required within that documentation, particularly around kind of negative pledges on assets or indebtedness clauses as well. So before kind of approaching new lenders or existing lenders, it's important to understand what your current documentation looks like and what the current abilities are in there to attract additional finance. And then who are you going to borrow it from? Again, you probably very simply got, well, who are the incumbent lenders? What does the rest of the banking market look like? But we're also seeing, we're seeing a lot more now in the last month or so, some of these special situation funds. So we're seeing, alternative lenders to the mainstream banks that are coming in and offering different types of funding, and maybe that's more in the mezzanine space, but that is an option. They can be quick. They can be lenders who don't normally need collateral, but sometimes the pricing will be higher, and therefore again, another key message that we would typically make is, yes, we have to get through this challenging period, but you need a business at the back end to be able to thrive. And if you put yourself into an over-indebted position, then yes, you may recover, but you'll never be able to thrive. So it's getting that balance right. And just in terms of some other kind of considerations, we've seen this, what the UAE Central Bank has done in this market has provided some temporary relief for sure. It supported UAE banks, which in turn have been able to support SMEs. It certainly helped. We've seen all around the world, these kind of relief programs and mechanisms can never be perfect. There is no perfect way of delivering these, but it certainly helped for sure. We've seen certainly within some of the banks, but also within the kind of family office space as well, is a kind of pressure on credit approval processes or investment approval processes. Typically in a BAU scenario, these processes are built for a BAU scenario, and what we're seeing now is increased volume and increased complexity of cases that are going through these processes. So again, it kind of reiterates those points of the need to go early, the need to go with the plan, the need to go with the scenarios thought through, and the need to go with that kind of holistic approach of, yes, we've thought of everything and we've done everything we can to try and get through that process a bit more quickly and to expedite that process. And I guess finally, understanding the challenges that banks will have on their side. Banks themselves have certain challenges around what they can and can't do. So there may be limits around their exposure to a certain borrower, a certain group, a certain sector. Having an understanding of that is important. And we see in this market particular a lot of kind of revolving credit facilities, short-term facilities that naturally will roll over. Again, in BAU, generally, there's no need to be overly concerned about the need to roll over if there's sufficient liquidity there. But what we're seeing now is, more and more need, I guess, for lenders to review those in a bit more detail. And again, that will need some active dialogue with the lender to make sure there are no issues. And I guess finally, we just wanted to probably touch on, so we've talked about, I guess, our kind of framework for how we as a firm, Deloitte, see the next kind of few years going and the cycle that the majority of businesses will go through. We've talked about the measures that need to be put in place to improve cash flow. We've talked about obtaining new funding. This is all very much kind of a reaction to a situation where cash is tight and we need to focus on liquidity. But I guess a natural question from that is once we've got that situation under control a little bit, once you're comfortable with your liquidity position, how then do you need to, what are the broader things we need to think about? So I think we've kind of focused on cash, but it's also important to understand that what COVID and the current situation has done is provided probably a reflection point, I think, for many businesses. I can talk about Deloitte and some of the things that we've done here in the region in terms of putting in some of these interim measures that actually will probably stay within the business going forward. But it's also a chance to reflect and navel gaze, I guess, on our own businesses. And we see many clients do this in the market. It's looking at services and product offerings, and do we need this wider product offering? Do we need to change? How is technology driving some of our operations and the way we do business? What is our operational and organizational structure? Is that optimized? Is that kind of built on a growth and regional expansion play that now probably will need to be put on hold for at least a number of years? And is there a need to kind of restructure the organization and the operations? But also looking at your own position and balance sheet position, is there ways of further strengthening the own balance sheet position to provide that foundation? Because I think what we've seen is people and businesses that came into COVID with a robust balance sheet have been able to take advantage of opportunities. And to Wakas's point earlier, we don't know how many future waves will come. We don't know if this is the end or when the end is. So by solidifying the balance sheet now could then give you that opportunity to take advantage of and optimize the ability to kind of generate profitability if we see further challenges along the way and further bumps along the road, which we're pretty sure that it is to come. Wakas, is there anything else you wanted to just cover, and maybe we'll close out?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I was just thinking about, I'm sure we'll get some very interesting questions, but one that I'll preempt is certainly people might be thinking, well, how do I shore up my balance sheet, right? I've got all these challenges from left and right, and suppliers calling me, and customers delaying payments, and so on. How do I shore up my balance sheet? And one element of that we've seen that businesses are looking at, particularly family offices and the larger conglomerates, are looking at non-core businesses. And are there any businesses that are either non-strategic, non-core, that don't fit part of our future strategy, that are either loss-making or essentially can be sold, shut down to cut losses, or can be sold to third parties to generate cash? And that's one way of shoring up your balance sheet. So we as a firm are working on some distress sale opportunities where certain groups are saying, here's a business, and indeed in some cases well-performing businesses that don't form part of the strategic direction and the future plans of groups, and they're saying, well, we'd like to dispose these off and use that cash to invest in our other businesses and essentially scale them up and enable them through the right tools and investments to take advantage of the future. Maybe look at use that cash to look at competitors or other deal opportunities that are in the market that are indeed strategic but also opportunistic, some good value type targets that we might look at. So those opportunities are very much there. I think we already spoke about various other elements, freeing up cash that's tied in your inventory. That's a way to shore up your balance sheet. Speaking to the lenders, speaking to equity providers, these are all part of it. So just to summarize, I think there are 2 or 3 key messages that are coming out of this presentation and our view. Before we go into Q&A, I'd just like to summarize those. So the first, of course, is the environment that we're all operating in, business, social, community, global, the environment continues to remain uncertain. We are in a better place, and we know a lot more about the pandemic, and authorities around the world have successfully managed the pandemic quite well, but there is still a great degree of uncertainty. What does that mean for businesses? It means you need to plan. You need to plan for alternate scenarios, and you need to think about different high, medium, low cases, the way different scenarios may plan out and what that means for your business, and then indeed have some very real, very open communication with stakeholders, with owners, with lenders, with suppliers, with customers around some of those scenarios and what that means. What we don't want are surprises. We want to know where businesses are headed, where our organizations are headed, so that we can plan and respond accordingly. So that's very, very important. And the last point that I'd like to make is part of that planning is also looking at how our business is going to look like in the future. In the new normal, in the post-COVID era, what does our business look like? How are we going to change our operating model? How are we going to do business in the new world? And I know I spoke about technology implementation, but there may be other elements to it as well. Coming up with policies and procedures around ensuring safety of employees and customers to continue operating. And a very simple example I can give you is let's say you go to a restaurant. Well, restaurant now has new policies around seating, around how their employees are behaving, how customers are made to feel very comfortable, employees wearing masks and those sort of things. That's all part of coming to terms with the new normal and enabling your business for it. So I think that from coming up with a digital delivery platform to e-commerce to very simple measures like educating and coming up with policies around employees and getting them to wear masks when dealing with customers, that whole range needs to be visited, and businesses need to plan for the new normal and set themselves up. And once that's done, I think businesses will find a lot of interest from investors, from lenders. And really people are still very optimistic around the turnaround and the thrive phase that will come out of it. I think there will be a lot of efficiency that we're all experiencing. I used to spend a third of my day traveling from meeting to meeting and being stuck in traffic and sometimes going on planes and airports and all. Now I finish one meeting and I click onto the next in an instant. And there is a certain efficiency that comes out of it. It's a lot more tiring, of course, but there is a certain efficiency that comes out of it. So that's it for us. We'd very much like to hear from you all and take some questions, and hopefully we can help out. So over to the audience.
I want to thank you, Waqas and Tom, and I mean, what an insightful session. Honestly, I'm certain that the audience would agree with me that this is very straightforward, straight to the point, simplified. And yeah, so we've received a couple of questions. I'm gonna start the first question from Muhammad. Muhammad is saying, what are alternatives to the cash flows? Is it useful to use asset value exchange?
Sorry, Sultan, the connection wasn't great. Could you just repeat the last bit of the question, please? What are the alternates to?
Yeah, so alternative to the cash flow, is it useful to use the asset value exchange?
It's and thank you, Mohammed. I think we we spoke about this in one of the tactical options that are available to businesses. A lot of businesses are looking at the cash that is tied up in the assets. So whether you look at your property, plant, and equipment, whether you look at your real estate assets, buildings, warehouses, etc., businesses are now looking at either sale or leaseback arrangements. Businesses are indeed looking at freeing up capital that's tied up in the balance sheet. So the examples around that, of course, are freeing up cash that's tied in your inventory, freeing up cash that's tied in your fixed assets that isn't of immediate use to you. No point in owning a building if you can't pay your suppliers and get the stock that allows you to run your. So sale and leasebacks are becoming more and more common, and that is indeed a way to free up cash. And of course, any unencumbered assets, any assets that you can exchange for funding with banks or provide as security or as collateral with banks and indeed other lenders or equity providers. We're seeing examples of all that in the marketplace. I came across an example a couple of weeks ago, I think last week, where a business was looking at essentially selling some land that it has and leasing it back from the new owners. The new owners are attracted to the land because they can buy it at a very good price right now. And for the business, it makes sense because it gives it cash to take advantage of a contract that it has the opportunity to acquire. So it needs working capital to complete the contract, which is hopefully very profitable for this business. So it's a win-win scenario for both parties. And I think those kind of transactions we're going to see more of in the marketplace.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I'd probably add to that as well, Waqas, is linked to our point where we were talking around, if we're going to new lenders or incumbent lenders for new money, really understanding what that kind of asset base, collateral base is there. Because I think, if you look back a few years, the typical structure was, you needed a fixed asset, a building, land and buildings was kind of the only, most attractive, I guess, fixed asset collateral for new money and lending. I think what we're seeing now is that diversify a little bit. So we're seeing more and more kind of receivables backed lending, inventory backed lending, even in kind of long leasehold properties, we're seeing some banks being kind of accepting that as a collateral package. So we're seeing much more diversity in the assets that lenders are willing to accept as collateral. I think that's great. Because as Waqas said, that kind of frees up cash within your balance sheet to use for cash flow if needed.
Yes, thank you, Jens. You've referred in the presentation to the scenario planning and how important it is. And this ties back with a question from Khulud. What do you think is the best way to properly plan these uncertain days? So plans are changing every hour due to uncontrollable events. I know you've already kind of tackled on this, but are there like specific advices you can provide?
Do you want me to go first, Waqas?
Yeah, I might as well. I think I've spoken enough about scenario planning, so go ahead.
Look, Sultan, I mean, we have to be honest on this point. This is probably the number one challenge in everything that we've talked about. Yes, it's easier said than done to come up with a scenario plan, but how do you build those scenarios? And I think Waqas talked about that kind of best and worst case scenario and really trying to put some realistic best and worst case scenarios on the table and to discuss with stakeholders. This is something that I think is never for one person in the organization to come up with an answer. This needs you need commercial and sales input from the people who are speaking to customers on the front line. You need input from finance who can put the numbers to it. You need input from HR to talk about what's the resource planning that you need and may have to adjust. So this really is a full organization process. So I think that's number one. You've got, this is not just a finance team's job or a strategy team's job. It's a whole organization project, and you need to involve as many heads as possible. I think the second thing is, look, there is so much uncertainty. Things are changing all the time. it's for us, it's about, no one has a crystal ball, right? There is no right and wrong answer here. It's a case of having a view, having a set of views to say, look, reasonable worst case, we think this, and best case is going to be this, and that's triangulated through a number of different data points throughout the organization, and you land on a set of scenarios. Having too many scenarios, it just gets too confusing. If you have too few, then you're not showing the full range. For us, 3 scenarios is good. That's a nice number to have. But it's really about showing that range and understanding, because really, from our perspective, running the scenario planning, yes, the output is important, but really the value that businesses will get from it is once you start changing some of those assumptions. If you start to say, okay, if I'm a restaurant and if I can operate at 100% capacity or 80 or 50, what does that look like? Because what it will show is what the key value drivers in the business, and at what point, what are the certain thresholds where you need to say, okay, if I can operate a restaurant at 50% capacity with 50% staff, that may work. Can I do it with 80? Does that quite work? But if 100, no, I need more staff. So what it does is, I think it allows the business to start forming a consistent view on, okay, we know this is the certain threshold, this is the certain hurdle. When we reach this hurdle, these are the other business decisions that need to come on. We need additional resource, we need additional finance, we need additional people in the sales team, etc., etc. So it's that kind of holistic and learning about the interconnectedness of the business, that there's the real value add from that process.
Thank you, Tom. I can imagine the number of scenarios which companies would have, changing elements every now and then, and a combined consolidated scenario planning. So it's not easy, as you said. It's a complex exercise. You've referred in the presentation as well, like while we were discussing cash is king, there are a number of opportunities currently in the market, and companies who have planned properly ahead of the pandemic probably have leveraged these opportunities now. This ties and as well when you refer to core versus non-core. So if you want to divest, let's say, your non-core business, at the other end of the transaction, there will be a part you would be using equity investment, I would say, if not that. So this ties with the question coming from Sanchi. So they're in a business which he haven't mentioned which sector, and I know it's difficult, Tom, to answer the question, but just give a little bit of insights. So they're seeing an opportunity now in the market. So, and they're a bit confused if they would invest now or wait to post-COVID. So the question is that the new business is an extension of the current business that they have, and it might take a significant amount of investment. Do you think I know it's difficult, okay, ahead. Do you think it's advisable to proceed now with the opportunity or wait until things are settled?
Do you want to go, Wakas?
Absolutely. It's a very, very good question, and it's the the old $64,000 question, right? Which is probably now the $64 question. I think, Sultan, the best example I can give you is if you look at equity markets, right? You look at share markets. So, me personally, and I'm going to speak really, really informally. Me personally, I'm a very optimistic person. And so when the pandemic hit and it all happened, my own view was that inshallah, hopefully, as humanity, we will prevail and we will find ways around it and we will make it work. And so when the stock markets were falling and prices went down quite a bit, international equities, I thought now is a good time to invest, right? But you never know what that bottom is, right? And I think if you end up waiting too long for that bottom, I wanted to be careful, and I wanted to really wait for them to completely bottom out. Before I knew, they started turning back up, right? And there will be probably some waves, but how do we deal with that? I think the best advice that I can give to businesses is, well, firstly, of course, it depends on your individual risk appetite, right? So are you prepared to take a decision now, or do you want absolute certainty? I think absolute certainty is a dream that we will never get to, right? If we keep waiting for the time to be right, it will be too late by the time we act. So what I would recommend is businesses look at their current scenarios. In a scenario like that, I'm assuming that this business has a competitor or something else that can enhance their capacity or enhance their capability, right? So for me, it's a matter of looking at what opportunity you see in the marketplace, what results can you get if you capitalize on the opportunity right now. If the purchase price and whatever cash flow or whatever capital you need to invest to acquire this business or to partner with it or to merge with it exceeds, if the benefit exceeds the cost, then go for it. I think a positive NPV, positive net present value investment right makes sense. And it's a little then fine. Of course, you really want to do is make sure that the analysis that you have is robust. We don't want to jump into an opportunity that has a positive net present value and then find out there was a problem in our fundamental assumptions and they were a lot more optimistic than reality. So of course we need to be robust in our decision making, but I think that any opportunity that you think is going to overall be cash flow positive, and it doesn't need to be immediately, but in the medium longer term, it generates value for the business and that value exceeds the investment you need to make right now. I think if you have the funding available, then businesses need to very seriously consider those opportunities. I just want to make one last little point here, of course, is, as Deloitte, we're here because we want to help our community. We want to use the expertise and the experience that we have to help our community. And that's essentially the purpose of this exercise. And we're not here to essentially promote ourselves. But on this point, I think it's important just to be prudent that when businesses are making these decisions, our advice always is to seek some professional help. Doesn't mean you need to call up me and Tom or our other esteemed colleagues at Deloitte, but get some help from people that know exactly what they're doing. Make sure that you have the right professional advice. If I have a stomach ache, I don't try to fix it myself. I go see a doctor because the doctor knows what they're doing, right? And I think that's really important. Seek some professional help where you can. Make sure analysis is robust, but at the same time, I think we should all be optimistic enough to try and take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. Hopefully, this thing will blow over, just like everything else. We're already seeing improvements in our lives, improvements in the way economies, governments, regulators have handled the pandemic, and we are very optimistic about the future. I think we've all learned new ways of doing business, right? In the past, I would have driven somewhere and be standing at a lectern and speaking to an audience. Now I'm doing it from the comfort and privacy of my own home, but still able to reach everybody. I think we've all learned a thing or two out of it, and hopefully we can capitalize on that going forward.
Do you mind if I add to that answer? Because I think it's a really interesting question. Actually, I can see the wording on this one. So what we say, there's a couple of interesting bits to this question. It's an opportunity now, and it's an extension of the current business. So to my mind, this isn't necessarily a greenfield startup. This is, it sounds like an innovation of an existing business. So I think you've got to ask yourself, if something isn't an opportunity and the fundamentals are there for it to be successful, those fundamentals shouldn't change in the next couple of years. And I think what we're seeing more and more of is people looking at the current situation and saying, actually, if I was to start again and redo this from scratch, I'd do it a lot differently. So I think there are some opportunities for new players and for innovators to take advantage of the current market opportunity, because you're learning without maybe the historical baggage that may have come before. Really interesting question.
Thank you, Jens. And I would say, like Waqas, really, I would vouch on what you've said on you're not here to promote yourself, because we've had this discussion before, and you are very keen to provide your expertise to the public. You have that sense of responsibility to the community, and I would like to thank you again for joining us today and sharing all these insights, you and Tom, with the audience. This is something that's really very interesting, and that's the whole purpose of this Chamber Talk webinars. The outcome of those, if audience take actions, is not going to be pandemic specific. This is something that's going to last even after the pandemic, and will make sure that the companies would thrive. And as well, allow me please to add on that question from your perspective, Waqas. I'm a trader myself, And I've been currently as well following the markets, mainly more into the forex rather than stocks. And as you said, no one would know the bottom and no one would know the highs. Valuations on stocks could be cheap even at the top and expensive even it's at the bottom. So, but from that perspective, what concerns me is if I believe in it, that it's going in the direction that I'm thinking of, I'll step in. All what I need to make sure is two things. I have enough capital to hold if it moves in the other direction, and I have extra capital to step in even at a lower position to go in the direction that I believe in. So it's a matter of belief, having the right a plan in place, and make sure that that's the right thing.
So Sultan, what you're doing in very simple terms is scenario planning, right? You've got your scenarios and
Yeah.
you've planned for them, right? This is really important. And thank you very much for giving us a very simple example of how scenario planning works. It's not something complicated that sits in financial models and spreadsheets. It's something that we can live and breathe every day.
That's totally right.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have one more question, but before having that question, I'm gonna refer. I can see, and probably you can see, Wakas and Tom. There is a question from Alex, and I believe that's very specific to a specific case. Alex, what we're gonna do, I'm gonna share with you the contact details of Wakas and Tom, and probably you can share your question in specific with them. The last question which I'm gonna have is on financing. So in these disruptive times and the challenging situation, how companies can encourage stakeholders to provide new funding while the macroeconomic environment is so challenging?
I think there's probably two lenses to this, if we're honest, Sultan. There's the kind of growth, innovation, improvement type funding. So, approaching a lender or a shareholder, or let's not just limit this to banks, it's equity as well. Going with a plan around, we need X amount to do 1, 2, 3. That's going to give us a more robust business going forward, and here's the return, and here's the improvements that it's going to generate. And I've done this analysis, and it's robust. And I've spoken to customers, I've spoken to suppliers, I've spoken to. We've done that. We've done our research. We've looked at the competition, etc., etc., etc. We've done our homework, and we think this is an improvement. So again, it kind of comes back to that business plan and the analysis that's in there for for a lender to kind of say, yeah, I see that, or a shareholder to say, this looks like an exciting opportunity. I want to invest in this because it's an opportunity missed if I don't. So I think that's probably lens number one. Lens number two might be, and it's unfortunate to say that there are businesses that are facing liquidity events right now, and these are perhaps businesses that have invested over a period of time. They've invested in capex, in infrastructure, or in people, in capabilities, in technology, etc., 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 and naturally needed a period to get to a break-even position before giving that financial return, and COVID has hit at a really unfortunate time. So I think lens number two is almost we need X amount of funding. Again, apologies for repeating myself a little bit, but it's how much money do we need it for? How long? How much bridge money do we need to get us through this situation and get back on that trajectory again? Because if you don't put the money in, it's value lost, because the ultimate backstop is perhaps a closure or liquidation of the business, worst case scenario. So it's almost we need to put the money in to save the value that's in the business. So I think for me that and you have to be very clear about what lens you're going to the banks, right? Because you may be speaking to different people within the banks, or similarly for equity holders, you need to go with a very clear rationale as to why you need that money. If you dress distress up as an opportunity, people can see through that, and that can lead to more problems further down the line. So that's kind of how I think we typically approach it.
Thank you, Tom. Any final closing notes from your end before I close?
I'd just like to again reiterate the point around scenario planning. I think that is very, very important. It's just around all kinds of planning, right? We are in a unknown world. and please, let's not prepare a plan and put it on. We need to revisit every single day, and we need to keep updating it based on real-time developments on the ground, real-time opportunities that we see. So I think that's very, very important. And also looking out for the opportunities that we have, looking out for how we can position our businesses for the new world that's coming in. I'll give you an example. One of the other hats I wear at Deloitte is also as leading our financial advisory healthcare practice, and a lot of is now looking at having virtual health and visit hospitals and doctors. So that's an investment into their future. So I think those things are very much there, and people need to plan for those and invest for the future. Outside of that, I'd very much like to thank the Chamber. Thank you personally for organizing a very successful event. I know you've put there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in these events. So thank you very much, and your team for that. The technology has stuck with us. Everything has gone smoothly. So thanks to the technology world for that. It's always a challenge. But really, thank you very much, and thank you for the audience. We got a number of participants. I saw the list. I think we almost got up to a high number of attendees, and we really appreciate everybody's time. We're very, very happy to help. Any questions that you may have, feel free to reach out via the Chamber to us. We're very much part of this community, and we feel strongly about our obligation to help in these circumstances. So thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Sultan. Thank you, team. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Akas. Thank you, Tom. This is really a very interesting session. I'm very delighted about it. Honestly, I'll make sure to stay in touch after this. I hope, like the audience as well, have really leveraged the insights that you provide. I want to thank them as well for joining. I want to highlight our program for the next week. Next week, we're going to have on Sunday with Salom and Partners, COVID-19 and force majeure, AUE law perspective. And on Tuesday is going to be with EY on a very interesting topic, protecting the business by protecting the family. So that's it for today. I hope we can get in touch soon physically, and stay safe. See you. Thank you all.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.